Hello everyone, my name is Matthew Dodds and welcome to the first video presentation for the SAGSA 2020 conference. In case you didn't know, I am the Vice Chair of the Sociology and Anthropology Graduate Students Association, and we had intended to do a conference for March 13th, 14th, and 15th that unfortunately never got to happen due to the COVID-19 issue, and therefore we decided that to give everyone the chance to put their hard work to use to create video presentations, if they would so choose, on kind of what they would have presented on the conference. And so therefore, I am the first video in this series, and I hope that this video will both inform you and show you kind of a template you can use if you would like to go forward and create your own video presentation for our conference, as we will be accepting submissions. All right, thank you very much. Let's get started. So today we're going to be talking about doing digital ethnography in the Web 2.0 era. So this presentation is going to be about ethnography, which is a very traditional sociological, anthropological research tool, and we're going to talk about it in the context of Web 2.0. So doing research on the internet and on internet communities, and how you would go about doing that, and let's get into that. So to just give a little outline about what this presentation will include, so this presentation will talk mainly about digital ethnography, so what ethnography is, what it is in the digital context, and the difference between it in Web 1.0 and the Web 2.0 era. We'll get into that difference. We will also talk about the ubiquity of the platforms and kind of the roles they play. We'll talk about guidelines for ethnographic practice. So this is, instead of being ethical concerns in this section, it'll be rules, categories, themes, things you should look for when you're going about doing your digital ethnography. Number 4, we're going to do some practice. So we're going to look at an online space that I have selected for us. I'm going to also give you some suggestions for some online spaces, and we're going to look through some other things I have found in my thesis research, because this is basically what I do for my thesis research. And finally, we're going to look at some ethical considerations, very briefly, for this kind of field research. So before we get into this, let's define digital ethnography. So ethnography itself was a very traditional anthropological practice, where a researcher would enter a physical space or community and use their 5 senses to kind of understand what they were studying, understand the community and the practices they were engaging in. They would ask questions, they would do interviews, they would do focus groups. This is meant to kind of ingratiate yourself into a community and then to kind of study it from that perspective. This is very traditionally associated with kind of like the kind of European men who would go to colonize tribes and kind of study them and live there as part of their tribe for a couple of years and then report their findings. And this is kind of split up into kind of 3 different ways you can understand this. So first is like the traditional field members or traditional field methods. So this is you going into a website in the digital context and kind of looking at things and kind of just understanding what they're talking about, following their posts, doing something like that. Typically this early research was about communities and their relationships with and the ideologies of the technology they were using. So you can imagine like a lot of hacker groups, darknet groups, cyber libertarians, cyber utopians, all these people using the internet for these are the early adopters of the internet, and this is what you would study in the kind of early days of this. You could also do an autoethnography, which typically was more about the researcher being part of a digital community and then writing an autoethnography about their experiences within that community and how that community understands itself. And then finally, you have your multi-sited or your extended case ethnography. So these are ethnographies where researchers might try to use the digital iteration of a community as part of a bigger picture of that community. So say you're talking about moms in a suburban area, right? you're both talking about like their like involvement in their school communities, their social activities, what they do outside of the internet, and also what they use the internet for. And so like, do they use the internet for tools to share information? How do they use the information they get from the internet out in the real world, right? And this is kind of like the early kind of stages of internet ethnography, where the internet was mainly a tool of the community that was under study, but not the whole thing itself. And this also goes back to, you could talk about like youth forums, or like forums for queer youth, and things like that. Examples of groups using the internet as a tool rather than the internet space itself being the community. To give you a quick, brief internet history lesson here, we also have to consider kind of, when we're going about this, the difference between web ethnography, digital ethnography in the Web 1.0 era and in the Web 2.0 era. So in the Web 1.0 era, you lived in an era of one-to-many communications, right? So what does that mean? That means like you post on a blog. You post a blog or you post a comment on a forum, and then everyone just reads it. Messages are basically communicated through this one modality, which is text, very strongly associated again with forums, blogs, some news websites, things like that. Basically, in this area, you read a forum post and you reply to it. Most of your interpersonal communication is done through emails or these forum posts. Younger people during the later stages of this era might have gotten something like AOL or Instant Messenger, as ways to kind of communicate a little bit more quickly. There was used an app for that, right? But it was still basically textual. Members in these communities in this era are mostly consuming the content they see on the internet. Like, they see it and they look at it. There wasn't dedicated internet communities, right? Social life hadn't migrated online. There weren't a lot of like videos or pictures really all that available consistently. And there weren't like massive image or video sharing platforms for this kind of communication to take place. So then in about 2005-ish is when you could put the earliest start dates of this at, to about 2008 is when you start to see the emergence of Web 2.0, which is where communications and communities exist over a complicated web of forums and multimodal forms of discourse. So this is the emergence of your social media, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Tumblr, Reddit, all of these different spaces that end up kind of communicating with each other, right? So you can take a Facebook post and post it onto Tumblr. You can take a Tumblr post and post it onto Reddit, and people can remix a meme. These are memes, right? Where people are remixing and constantly shifting something, which brings us to our next bit. Right? These cultural objects, which are memes, videos, texts, ideas, are disseminated in an increasingly layered way across platforms. So debates and communities kind of exist in multiple different spaces, and they're all communicating back and forth through these different spaces, right? And this also means that members are producing and consuming kind of the cultural object at the same time. They become prosumers, and this is called prosumption, where everyone is engaged in both the consumption of and the creation of the cultural artifacts. To kind of give a little bit of media studies background there. I don't really have any more notes on this topic. But yeah, the really big important point here, though, is that this era is very much should be understood as kind of part and parcel with the emergence of powerful internet platforms. So let's talk about those platforms now, shall we? Think about all the platforms you might use in a day, right? Think about how you might see the same joke repeated across different platforms, how people might take a meme and make it more relevant for the platform they took it from, or for the platform they're posting it on, than it was from the platform they saw it on. These platforms are where cultural knowledge is increasingly generated and changed. It is important for anyone who wants to be able to research in the digital space to be digitally literate, to kind of understand how these communities work and how they crisscross each other, to be able to find the communities and the artifacts that are relevant for the research. Equally important is to understand the demographics, purposes, and media the platforms operationalize, right? So some platforms prize written posts, while others prize videos and interactions with videos. This is also where term engagement is very important. Some apps are photo-based. What age groups use the platform, right? Facebook and Twitter is a lot more common with older people. Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok are more common with Gen Z. Certain countries don't have Twitter or Facebook, right? So you might think about who's being left out of a conversation, or versus what voices are not being heard in a certain community, given who has access to the platform. So it's important to think critically about all these kind of questions before you start doing research in this space. A few more things you want to consider as you do your digital research is a few more things about anonymity and kind of about media, right? So for instance, people on Facebook are more likely identifiable than they are on Reddit, Tumblr, Twitter, or 4chan because people on those platforms use their real name, or on Facebook use their real name for the most part. So these people might be less willing to speak more openly than they would on a platform where they're able to remain a little bit more anonymous. And it's also important to note the kind of media differences between these platforms. For example, Reddit and 4chan are almost entirely text-based, with imagery and the video being a secondary method of communication. But for an app like YouTube or TikTok, where the video is the primary method of communication, and YouTube prizing a long-form professionalized content, and TikTok prizing a short-form amateur phone-made content, and both kind of what that means for the people who use it and kind of how that changes the message or the kind of operationality of the kind of platform. So you've thought about your platforms, you've thought about what you want to study, and you've thought about where you're going to find it. So now we need to kind of ask 4 important questions about this stuff before we get really started into the nitty-gritty of it. So first question, what established cultural practices and etiquette are set up for new members? What established cultural practices and etiquette are set up for new members to join conversations or select a conversation partner? And now this is kind of easy. You can find these on forum rules. If there's like a watch this video before asking any questions, that's usually a good place to start. This is vocabulary learning. This is like any shorthand or short text that's used to communicate kind of a wider example or meaning. This is very important to figure out here. Question 2 is, what visual cues are communicated in the usernames of social media members to signify membership? So you're looking at maybe things in a Twitter handle or in a Twitter name. People using this emoji. It's a symbol of association with Donald Trump and the far right. People using red roses can be a symbol of being associated with the Democratic Socialists of America. Another good alt-right example is if you see the term 14/88 in someone's bio, it means they associate themselves with kind of the alt-right. It's a Hitler reference that I don't really care about to explain. Question 3 is, beyond the use of emoticons, what visual strategies do producers use in their online communication? So this is memes for the most part, right? You're looking at filters, like how memes use a rhetorical style to communicate a message. How is the space set up? What things are emphasized, what things are not emphasized, to kind of to make specific points. And then finally, you want to look at what are some cultural innovations devised by members who frequent social media sites to create coherency in their conversation. So this could be like what sort of discursive tools they use to kind of make a point or kind of to create the sense of community, right? So this could be trolling on 4chan, and the kind of how that became a ubiquitous part of internet culture. You can look at kind of canceling what that means on Twitter and how people go about doing that. You can look at Gamergate and what that kind of did for a community, to create a community that was both very hostile to women, and also what kind of tools they used to kind of spread their message and also silence those who didn't share their message. So these are basically like kind of innovative tools, the way people use the internet space available to them to kind of further their own community goals. Now, if we've answered those questions, we can follow on to some typologies and kind of other kind of activities that can kind of help guide your research, kind of put you in the right directions, right? So your first one you want to look at is the three things you want to follow: the thing, the medium, and the natives. So following the thing, this means the community or the cultural artifact that you were trying to look into, right? So what platforms does this thing pop up on? Who is using or sharing it, right? What do people say about it? These are pretty general questions. These should be kind of like answered in like a research proposal, but this is just a good way to kind of consistently refresh and remind yourself what you're actually doing. Number two is following the medium, right? So where is this community or thing, right? What is it about the platform or the medium that kind of attracts this particular thing? And how does the platform add to the thing? So why did this community of anti-vaccine moms pop up on Facebook and not Tumblr or 4chan or Reddit, right? Why is this group of really lonely, angry white boys mostly on Reddit? They aren't on Tumblr. I know I only used like 4 platforms for things, I guess, I don't know. Why are all these political leaders and speech leaders on Twitter and not on Facebook? What's the difference between the messaging there, right? Why does it matter what the president tweets and not posts on Facebook, right? These are different kind of questions you want to ask yourself as you go. And finally, you want to follow the natives, right? So who seems to be the most fluent in the language of this digital space? What do they say and how do they use the language that they use of the space, right? Who reacts the strongest to what they do? And what digital spaces do the natives traverse? Do they just stay on the one platform that they use, or do they use other ones? Do they tell you about their other pages? Do they say the same thing on both pages, right? So it's about kind of following the people, the kind of like natives here in this case. So these are probably going to be your millennials or your Gen Zs or your early adopters. The people whose social identity is really fundamentally tied in with the internet community in question. Which actually brings us quite neatly to our user typology, which is just 4 types of users that you can kind of get an idea of if you look in a digital community for long enough. Not everyone fits into every category, but like these are some good general ideas to kind of keep you rooted in who you want to be talking to and who you want to be looking at. So first you've got your devotees, right? So this person is likely the loudest person in the space, like the loudest. This person comments on everything. They'll like everything. They'll be the ones who engage in the most vigorous debate in the community. And these are the ones who will really try the hardest to get you to join. However, on the flip side of that, these could be the people who might viciously attack outsiders or critics of the group and its purposes, its ideologies, or its activities, right? So these people are the people who are most committed to whatever an idea it is that they've entered the digital community about. But these are also the people who are more likely to go on the attack, who are more likely to join the mob if someone does or says something that they don't agree with. The insider, and these are like your group admins for the insiders, right? So these people might be the social backbone of the community. People will reference previous things from them. They'll say, hey, get in touch with this person. They might be able to help answer your questions about this, or they faced a similar problem, These people might be the public-facing images of the community in question, like Milo Yiannopoulos used to be for Breitbart, or Mark Carnegie for Flat Earthers, if that's a niche one, if anyone's interested in that. Your newbies, exactly how it sounds, right? So these are the people with low consumption and the weak community ties. So low consumption means they're kind of just like there. They don't really absorb much. They're just kind of dipping their toes in the water. They don't have really strong community ties. Meaning they haven't built the relationships yet. They're just kind of lurking, seeing if they like the community. And these people might ask a stupid question, which will usually get them, will have them feel the wrath of the devotee. They might ask a question or make a comment without knowing the full context of the group. And so these people are the ones that will make the mistakes the most. Finally, you've got your minglers. So this is basically, like, you can kind of understand it as a mom friend. So they'll be theoretically committed to whatever it is the group has organized itself around. But they're less interested in that aspect of it than they are in the actual community aspect of it. So they're specifically there to help maybe the insider organized groups, keep people informed, keep the conversation in like a good pace, in a good space. They might help the insider organize things. They might help them, or the newbie, they might help them integrate. And they will often get, they will comment, but the purpose is to build a social relationship, to integrate the community as best they can. Another really important question you want to look at here is the role of yourself, the role of the researcher in the research, right? So in the digital space, because you're not physically in a community as you were in a traditional ethnographic sense, you're going to have to go about gathering your research in a bit of a different way, right? So you have two major choices for this, right? You can either go about collecting your data as a kind of integrated researcher, right? So you go into the group and you say, I am a researcher doing research on this topic. I would like to ask these questions. This is how I'm going to use, anonymize, and methodologically code my data. And this is what I would like from you guys. These are the questions I have for you. Can you let me research you? And, usually if you do that, people will say, okay, and they'll make rules around that. Or you can do a distance observation. But it's very important that you have to ask that kind of question. So let's get into it for a second here. So in the active participation, you can be, there's some pros and cons to both, right? So your active participation is a thicker description. You get a much better descriptive amount of data that you can utilize for your research. You also have a little bit more of a diversity of methods you can use. You can interviews, focus groups, survey questions, things like that to kind of outline basic ideas. And it's good to have your community take interest in your research that way. Like, they can kind of contribute in more deep, fulfilling ways if you work at that angle rather than just kind of passively lurking and scraping websites for data. One of the cons of this kind of research, though, are a few of them. The Hawthorne effect. So this is when people who are being researched and studied and observed act differently because they know they're being observed, which means that they may act to influence the conclusion of your research. And it can be difficult to make kind of broad generalizations when working on specific individual behaviors and the kind of specific ways that these people understand their own behaviors in their own communities. So when you do distant observation, again, when you're lurking and just scraping data or like getting content for analysis, you can get higher breadths of data, right? You can get higher breadths of data because the community is basically proceeding as if you weren't there. They don't know you're there for all intents and purposes. So you witness an internal culture of the group and you witness the internal politics of the group. So you're kind of watching how everything plays out, how people interact between different posts, what ideas kind of get built and fleshed out, which ones get shut down, and how that kind of works back and forth. And then finally, you've got, for cons for this kind of research, though, is you get a lack of data on nonverbal cues, right? You don't see someone who looks a little awkward because a comment was made that they didn't quite agree with. You don't see, like, the looking away or the, like, rolling of the eyes or, like, the shifting of the body, right? So you miss out on that. You lack a kind of meta context. You lack the kind of understanding of the person's life context that they make all of their opinions in and how they understand themselves within their meta context. And you also just get no personal interrogation with the community members, right? You're not like there asking somebody to unpack something that they said, or like, hey, you said this now, but now that this has come to light, does your opinion change? Is your thoughts different? Are your thoughts different, right? So you kind of lose that interpersonal relationship that you would get if you were actively participating in the group that you were researching. So we're actually gonna do some practice here about my research, concerning kind of my research, and we're gonna kind of go through what this means in the context of research, right? So my research concerns memes shared in conspiracy Facebook groups. So we're going to do a little practice about that. If you're analyzing memes, you're less doing ethnography than you are doing kind of more content analysis, discourse analysis, multimodal discourse analysis. But there's ways you can do it in a kind of digital ethnographic way as well, which we're going to get into momentarily. But let's just take a quick look at some of the memes. We're going to talk about some of the visual cues, kind of rhetorical strategies of the community, kind of key themes for the community, and we're going to come back to kind of a practice example in a minute. So first off, what we can see here is if we're looking at these kind of images, right, you can see kind of themes about disease, fears about 5G, vaccinations, depopulation, right? You can see kind of the themes of these conspiracy groups kind of already kind of taking shape, and you kind of understand how they're going. These are some fun ones I got. This was a fun one I got from a Flat Earth group. And this one was one about your birth certificate being proof that you are collateral against the government debt, which was both interesting points. You can see memes about kind of being a hardcore truther, which I really like. If you have time, you can look at some of these a little more in depth and get a chance to see if you agree with them. You can kind of unpack them a little bit and kind of what they mean. This one here about the globe being just a lie and a form of psychological abuse and gaslighting, which is very smart. It's very interesting to see, like, you know, serious kind of psychological terms being utilized by others. Talking about health and natural defenses, you know, themes about virus, vaccinations again, the New World Order, that's a favorite. And you can kind of also see, you know, more about flat Earth stuff, but also like this page about how the man-made climate change hoax, this hoax that man is affecting the climate, will eventually lead to total human slavery at the bottom. You know, these are very interesting things to unpack all in themselves, and kind of what you're doing in a digital ethnography, you're kind of unpacking each one and kind of what it means in the context of this digital community. So here, just as a quick form of example, I am on the Reddit page for the New World Order, which is a conspiracy group, which is a conspiracy theory that the world is going to enter a form of global governance, where the UN is going to assert domination over the entire planet, and it's going to be, you know, terrible. And so you can see kind of when you're looking through this, right, you can see themes about vaccinations. Bill Gates here is a very fun theme. They don't really like Bill Gates. You can see kind of here that I'm browsing by hot, right? We can see there's 2,800 members, 19 members currently online. We can see when this group was created. It was created Christmas Eve in 2008, hilariously enough. You can see the moderators. So this could be a good example if you want to talk to moderators to get permission to study the group, if you want to be a more integrated member. You can see the kind of engagement posts are getting here, what the themes are, right? So this fear of government censorship here has 7 likes. And this is kind of a slower group than some of the other ones, but you can kind of start to see, right, you know, memes here about conspiracy theorists being crazy or the people who don't believe in conspiracies being crazy because they don't believe that Freemasons run the world. You see here again, fears about Bill Gates, microchips, vaccination. And you can go through these pages, watch the videos, look at the memes, read the comments, and that's how you kind of unpack things in a digital ethnography. So for anyone who wants to go about trying this on their own but doesn't quite know what they would want to study in their own way, right? I've given you some examples here that you can use as kind of like a way to start thinking about digital ethnography, right? So you can go to Reddit, again, where I was, and you can look at r/theDonald, or r, yeah. This is the pro-Donald Trump subreddit. You can do hashtag Wexit on Twitter. You could look at Believers on Instagram. A couple of other subreddits there. There's a Doctor Who fandom. You could look at kind of like fan pages, forums, fan fictions would be a fun one if you wanted to read a bunch of fan fictions. And then finally, this is a group that I'm in. It's called Numtots, which is New Urbanist Memes for Transit-Oriented Teens, where they make a lot of memes and content and political discussion about, urbanism, urban design, urban living, the importance of public transit, trains, buses, metros, things like that. So very important, very interesting idea if you want to kind of delve into something a little bit concrete and work with that. And again, here's just a page with all the information on it, collected, so you can look at it and kind of go about conducting your online research. Now, before we wrap up here, I just wanted to talk quickly about ethics, because this is an interesting question for digital research that you're going to have to kind of answer, although the ethical considerations vary across school boards because this is an emerging field still. So some ethical considerations you want to make if you're going to doing research online is you want to talk about anonymity, right? So how do you protect the data you collect? So if you're collecting tweets and all you have is like users put in a system like user 1, user 2, user 3, user 4, and so on, and then you just have the date, time, and tweets you actually got from them, but you don't put any identifying information about the user in there, right? Someone could still type in the exact text of a tweet you put in your research paper and find that person's tweet. Or they could reverse image search something that you've got. So you have to be a little bit careful about that. Oh, and you need to get a little bit more excessive permission. Although some people disagree with this because if you post online, this goes to our second point, who owns what? If you post something online on a platform that is publicly accessible, then it theoretically is considered public use, public domain, fair game for anyone to use. Great for research. So it's just going to be a balance, and it is going to more reflect your university's ethic boards and kind of the specific community and digital space you are using to do your research, right? So does Twitter own something, or does the public own it? If this was a Facebook group that everyone gets invited to, but you still had to apply to be a part of, do you need to do, what kind of ethical considerations do you need to make if, as opposed to if your research was just all on a publicly open Reddit forum? And then you want to consider just vulnerable populations. If you're doing research on, racial minorities, sexual minorities, women who have suffered domestic violence, anyone who's a population who might be considered vulnerable, you want to just do the extra step to make sure that they aren't hurt by being a part of your research. And I think there's just one last question I want to leave you guys with as a way to consider how to do internet research. Is how can you tell who or what is serious on the internet? How do you tell who means what they say and who doesn't on the internet? And with that, we are done. You can email me any questions, queries, or quandaries that you have. Here, I'll type my email out for you. You can email me here with any questions you have, and I'd be happy to answer them. And thank you so much, guys, for watching this video, and I hope you all have a great rest of your social distancing. Thank you very much. Goodbye.